Hey everyone, welcome to the 10th and final lecture in our series on imitation learning. I'm Sanjiban Chaudhary, a research scientist at Aurora and soon to be assistant professor at Cornell. Over the past 9 lectures, we have journeyed through the depths of imitation learning. We compressed all knowledge down to a single game-theoretic framework. Armed with just this knowledge, in the series finale, we finally lift off and set our sights on new and distant frontiers. In a sense, we've only just begun. I hope you enjoyed this preview of exciting ideas to come. Hopefully by now, you've been convinced that imitation learning is a promising and powerful tool to teach robots. Today I'll make a stronger statement. Robotics fundamentally relies on imitation learning. Let me show you. Let's peek into the mind of a typical roboticist who's seriously attempting to build a personal home robot that can solve a multitude of tasks. How would they go about this process? Well, they would ask the million-dollar question, how would a human solve this task? To do so, they would rely on a database of human experiences of having accomplished these day-to-day household tasks a priori. Roboticists are typically very good at breaking down these human experiences, analyzing them, and then getting the robot to attempt a similar feat. While this process has historically been promising for building a robot for a singular task, it simply cannot scale when a robot has to potentially solve an infinite set of tasks in an open world environment. Instead, if you are to have any hope of solving this problem, a roboticist must spend their time building a singular imitation learning framework that translates human experiences to a potentially infinite repertoire of robot policies that can solve these various tasks. Okay, so what imitation learning algorithm should one use? As we argued in the previous lecture, we can boil down the entire body of imitation learning work to a singular game-theoretic framework. What is this unified framework? Well, one of the players in this game is the robot. For example, Boston Dynamics' backflipping Atlas humanoid robot. Another ingredient is a human expert, for example, Olympic gold medalist Simone Biles doing an impressive gymnastic maneuver. The final ingredient is a set of value functions. Think of these as metrics on how good a state action combination is. And you can have potentially multiple such metrics that measure things that you care about. Now, the important bit is that the robot and value functions are locked in a game-theoretic battle. Think of the robot policy as a generator that's generating various state action distributions, and the value function as a discriminator that's trying to tell apart the robot state actions from human state actions. Mathematically, we can write this down as a min-max game, where we're min over robot policies pi, max over value functions f, and the payoff is the value of the robot policy minus the value of the expert policy. And that's pretty much it. Okay, so equipped with this knowledge, we're finally ready to lift off and venture forth increasingly into the unknown. Our first stop will be to explore the notion of concepts in the context of imitation learning. Let's begin by reflecting on the complexity of a robot navigating alongside humans in the wild. I want you to picture a congested traffic intersection and think about how should a robot navigate from point A to point B through this traffic. Presumably it would have to predict how humans would move in the scene and in some sense influence that motion to make space. To understand the problem better, let's abstract away the scene and replace robots and the other agents as nodes in a graph. The robot's trying to get to a certain goal. However, to find the optimal path to that goal, it needs to know the future motions of each agent, right? Because it obviously does not want to collide with an agent. And that future motion is uncertain. Moreover, Future motions of an agent depend on what other agents in the scene are doing as well as what the robot are doing. So really this is a joint multi-agent planning problem. You sort of have to predict uh, what all the agents in the scene are likely to do in a joint fashion. And that prediction depends on what the robot's going to do. So more formally, this is typically solved by writing down a game tree, where at each round, the tree branches on the possible actions of the agents in the scene. So maybe we begin by branching on the robot actions, then we move on to agent 1 and we branch on their actions, agent 2, and so on. At this point, you can probably intuit that this tree is going to explode in size, and more formally, it's going to be exponential in the number of agents in the scene as well as exponential in time. Okay, so clearly this is a hard problem, but we seem to be missing something because humans navigate such scenes every day. My claim is the thing that we are missing is that there is a hidden, discrete language to driving that you and I take for granted implicitly. Consider the simplest example of a contested merge where we have the robot in the merge lane and the human on the highway, and that those are the only two cars in the scene. For the robot to plan its optimal motion, it needs to predict what the human would do, and this is a continuous space of possibilities, right? So in each node of the search tree, the robot's searching over continuous actions and then thinking about what actions a human can take, and so all of this results in a fairly large search tree that's at least exponential in time. The key insight is while there are infinite set of possibilities, there are two main clusters of futures that are worth reasoning about. In mode 1 of the cluster, the robot yields to the human, right? So if we play out all possible robot trajectories in mode 1, the robot always ends up going after the human. And the nice thing about being in this bucket of possibilities is it's clear that the optimal action is to slow down and let the human pass. Put differently, the value function for being in this branch of the multiverse um, encourages the robot to dissolve at this time step. Similarly, there's a mode 2 where the human yields to the robot, and so for all possible trajectories that the human and the robot could take, the human's ending up behind the robot. And once again, for these set of possible futures, the optimal action is to accelerate. And so we've taken reasoning about a belief over continuous trajectories, which is a huge space, to almost binary space of modes, which is a massive reduction and allows us to solve this problem in a tractable manner. This hidden language is far more general than just driving. It applies to pretty much all behaviors, and I like to use the word concepts to attach a name to this hidden language. More formally, think of concepts as discrete modes of statistical regularities in behavior. For instance, in driving, we have this concept of yielding, which is a very discrete concept that buckets the set of possible future motions into two categories. Either we yield to them, so that we go after them, or they yield to us, they go after us. In the paper, Byron et al. Argues that when imitation goes on in nature, for example, baby chimpanzees imitating their mothers to feed off nettle plants, they're not memorizing what their mothers are doing. Instead, they are clearly leveraging some notion of concepts of statistical regularities. For example, knowing that no matter what the initial condition of the nettle plant is, it has to go through stages where debris are removed and petioles are detached, and then the leaf blades are folded, and then finally the leaf is consumed. Okay, how does the notion of concepts help us in imitation learning? If we return back to our min-max game and think about the class of value functions f, concepts lend a structure to this class of value functions. It conveys what matters. For example, did the robot end up yielding to the human? Or did the chimpanzee manage to remove debris and detach petioles from the plants? Now, these concepts can either be built in by the designer or auto-generated by extracting statistical regularities by employing unsupervised learning. In either case, concepts are critical if robots are to truly perceive and act in a continuous world with human partners. And with that, let's venture forth into the increasing unknown. The next notion that we have to reckon with is the notion of trust between the human teacher and the robot learner. Trust is the most consequential topic that will determine the future of the robotics industry. On the one hand, we have everyday human consumers who must trust that the robot can indeed do what it's claiming to do, that the self-driving car will indeed be safe, that the robot surgeon will indeed perform the surgery correctly, and so on. On the other side of the equation, you have roboticists and robots that have to win over the trust of the human partners or consumers. And what better way to understand the problem than to look at the most important example in robotics, a robot arm helping grandma in the kitchen. The robot arm performs actions like stirring the pot or fetching a jar, and grandma intervenes whenever she doesn't feel comfortable. Um, Roboticists typically model this as the human has a latent trust level, low, medium, and high, that is just not observable at test time. So the robot has to maintain a belief over the human's trust and then act according to this belief. If they feel that the human's trust is very low, they try to stay away from risky actions. As you can intuit, this is not going to work out because it's really difficult to get a reliable model of the human's trust. And even if you could, it's intractable to reason over the belief of how this trust can evolve over time. Certainly, we humans aren't doing something so sophisticated as solving a belief space planning problem when interacting with each other. And so there must be a simpler explanation. For instance, what if we were to think of levels of trust as levels of the human's value function? Consider our favorite example of a race car driving around a track. Let's abstract away the track and think about the set of states that the human visits. Um, Not all states in the set are equal. You have an inner circle of states that the humans fairly confident are really, really good states that has low action values. And initially, when the robot starts, maybe the human's comfortable with the robot being in these states. As the trust increases, the human expands the set of allowable states to a second circle that maybe has higher action values uh, because maybe they are riskier states. And finally, when the human really trusts the robot, it's comfortable letting the robot drive at a high speeds towards a barrier to make a hairpin turn, for example. Um, and those could be these sort of final set of states that the human allows the robot to visit. So you can think of trusts as being a sequence of levels that the robot unlocks to play harder and harder games with more on the line, right? And this fits so naturally into our game-theoretic framework, where we are restricting the class of value functions to first get the easy parts of the problem correct and then the increasingly more difficult parts and so on. And while there are many details still left to be worked out, it seems that the game-theoretic framework is a very promising way to reason about trust. Now, beyond this frontier lies the complete unknown, and this series would not be complete without speculating on the existential question of artificial intelligence, the quest to generate explanations. What better way to finish a lecture series on imitation learning than to revisit Alan Turing's iconic paper on the imitation game? In this paper, Turing begins by positing the questions, can machines think? Quickly dismisses attempts to answer this question as absurd, and instead proposes a crisper alternate question in the form of an imitation game to interpret within our very own game-theoretic framework. So, there are three players in this imitation game. First, the machine. Second, another human. And finally, a discriminator. The objective of the game is for the discriminator to determine which of the other two is the human and which is the machine. Mathematically, we can write this down as the same old min-max game, where we are min over policies pi. These are policies that the machine uses, answers to questions, and max over the questions the discriminator can ask. And the payoff is, can the discriminator tell which is the human policy versus which is the robot policy? So you can think of these functions f as being a measure of how human-like the answers are. And so the goal of the discriminator is to search for questions that really maximally discriminate between the robot and the human. And the goal of the machine is to come up with answers that confuse the discriminator. Now, this imitation game, popularly known as Turing test, is so fundamental to any discourse in artificial intelligence that we haven't stopped to reflect on whether we have missed an important detail in the imitation game. That detail is, do we really care about answers to any question? Or are there some questions that are more important than others? What is it that we really want from an intelligent machine? At this juncture, I defer to the wisdom of quantum physicist David Deutsch's magnum opus, The Beginning of Infinity. David argues that the ultimate quest is to generate good explanations. Explanations are assertions about what is out there and how it behaves. A good explanation is one that is hard to vary while still accounting for what it purports to account for. For example, our explanations for how objects in the sky move started from bad explanations rooted in astronomy, but then progressed on to Newton's law of gravity and now Einstein's law of general relativity. So what better goal for an AI system than to generate better explanations than we have today about the world? And how does one generate good explanations? Deutsch argues that we do so through conjecture, criticism, and testing. So a really aspirational goal for artificial intelligence is to ultimately build explanation machines. How do we go about doing that? Well, we have only one trick, so we fall back on our same old min-max trick. Build a learner to search over the space of explanations. The max player searches over the space of tests. The payoff function is to test whether an explanation provides a better answer than a human explanation. So this explanation machine here is a generator of explanations, and tests are discriminators. And while building this machine is an arduous task that is beyond the realm of our current science and more in the realm of science fiction, it fills me with incredible hope and optimism to have a blueprint for our North Star that we should all be eventually aiming for. And on this very optimistic note, we're finally at an end. I'm immensely grateful for your time, and I would like to leave you with a favorite quote of mine from Deutsch's Beginning of Infinity. Many people have an aversion to infinity of various kinds, but there are some things that we do not have a choice about. There's only one way of thinking that is capable of making progress or of surviving in the long run, and that is the way of seeking good explanations through creativity and criticism. What lies ahead of us, in any case, infinity. All we can choose is whether it is an infinity of ignorance or of knowledge, wrong or right, death or life.